Hello. This is The Spectrum, where we walk through today's most important news with facts first, human meaning, and why it actually matters for your life. Today we're taking a look at a major shift in the Strait of Hormuz and what that means for war risks, fuel prices, and what's really happening with ships, flights, and regional safety. How it's possible a deal with Iran might actually be taking shape, and also what the latest jobs, inflation, and housing outlook means for your wallet, your work, and your home. My name is Jared with The Spectrum. Let's get started. Hello, and thank you so much for joining in. My name is Jared, and this is The Spectrum, where we cover today's news and relate it to our human factor today. Our top story for tonight, Trump pauses Project Freedom and oil prices drop. President Trump says that he has ordered the U.S. military to pause Project Freedom, the operation to escort merchant ships through the Strait of Hormuz, to give diplomacy a chance. He's also claiming great progress in talks with Iran have been made, and markets have actually reacted. Oil prices have dropped sharply on hopes that a deal could reopen shipping lanes and reduce the risk of a larger war. Reports from multiple outlets say intermediaries, including Pakistan, are helping both sides test a narrow framework. Focus first on settling the Hormuz crisis and leave long-term nuclear sanction issues for later rounds. What is confirmed? Here's what we know. The U.S. did launch a ship escort mission and has now paused it by presidential order. Oil prices fell after Trump talked about progress in talks and after reports of a potential Hormuz-focused framework. Both U.S. and Iranian officials acknowledge some form of mediated or indirect contacts. Now here's what's not confirmed, what we don't know yet. The exact terms that are being discussed, whether Iran will clear mines, pull back certain weapons, or accept monitored shipping quotas. What, if anything, the U.S. is offering in return, for example, a change in sanctions, naval posture, or strike rules. Also, how long will this pause last? And what would trigger a restart of the escort mission? Across the news outlets, there are different approaches they take. And some are not telling all that this story has to say in the same way. Some of the right-leaning coverage focuses on Trump's threats and strengths and presents the pause as proof that Iran blinked. But they spend less time on the facts that the corridor is still partly closed and hundreds of ships remain stuck. Some of the left-leaning coverage covers highlights of dangers of Trump's brinksmanship and the humanitarian cost of the war, but they can underplay that Iran's deliberate closure of a key shipping lane is itself a form of economic warfare. Very few outlets carefully explain how this sequencing, Hormuz first, nuclear later, changes the leverage and risk for ordinary people. So what's the human impact? The concern here is that millions of people's economic and physical lives are now pinned on a pause that could either open a door to de-escalation or simply be a breather before the next round of strikes. For crews that are stuck on ships at sea, this pause is not a talking point. It's the difference between going home and waiting for danger for the next few weeks. For families already stretched by high prices, a sustained drop in oil costs can mean catching up on bills instead of falling further behind. For ordinary Iranians, a path that softens the chokehold on shipping without triggering more bombing may be the only route back towards a semi-normal economy, even if it leaves deeper political issues unresolved. So why does all of this matter? If this pause leads to a real arrangement that lets ships move safely, it can reduce war risk and stabilize fuel costs faster than any speech or slogan. If talks stall and escorts resume under higher tension, the chance of miscalculation that kills civilians or sinks a major tanker goes up. And that would force allies, markets, and militaries into a much more extreme position. For you, the outcome will show up first, not in dramatic clips, but in your gas bill, in your delivery fees, and really how anxious companies sound about supply chains. The way different outlets frame this as triumph, betrayal, or just a pure horse race can either help you see the real trade-offs or keep you focused on the political drama instead of structural risks. And if we normalize the idea that shipping lanes can be weaponized like this, we should expect similar tactics by others in the future, which means this is about the rules of the global economy, not just this one conflict. The Hormuz crisis traps ships, cancels flights with a wider ripple. Our next story helps us dive a little bit deeper. Even with the escorted mission pause, the Hormuz crisis is far from solved. Hundreds of merchant ships remain stuck or behind the Gulf region, waiting for a safe route through the strait. Regional attacks continue. The UAE recently reported intercepting a dozen ballistic missiles in a single day, and a residential building in Oman was hit. Ports in Iran, the UAE, and Oman have seen drone and missile strikes. And it's not just the sea. One aviation analytics firm says airlines have canceled roughly 13,000 flights scheduled for May, cutting nearly 2 million seats as they reroute around conflict zones and respond to shifting demand. Now here's what we know. We know that ships are still not moving through the Hormuz safely. The UAE and neighboring countries have reported multiple missile and drone attacks and interceptions. Airlines have canceled thousands of flights this month, reducing millions of seats. What's not confirmed is that what share of total shipping will be able to move or move even under a narrow corridor deal. We don't know how long airlines will keep current reroutes and cancellations. And we also don't know whether specific carriers or trade routes are being quietly targeted more than others. In many of the outlets that are reporting this footage, they are reporting dramatic footage of missiles, ships, and explosions, and they're spending less time explaining how supply chains actually work and how companies are adapting. Right-leaning outlets will focus heavily on stories of missile defenses and toughness, while minimizing the economic toll on small businesses, workers, and travelers. Left-leaning outlets are going to highlight civilian charm, but can undercover defensive measures that are actually preventing worse outcomes. So what's the human impact? The concern here is that a crisis many people experience only as the word Hormuz is in reality days of lost pay, missed visits, frayed nerves for people who just need to move themselves on their goods from one place to another. A ship trapped at sea isn't just a statistic. It's a crew away from home, a company paying for idle vessels, and customers wondering whether their fuel or supplies are, wondering where their fuel or supplies are. A canceled flight isn't just an inconvenience for some. It means missing medical treatment, job interviews, and time with the family they may not get back. And in countries already uneasy about the conflict, each siren and shelter alert adds a layer of stress that never appears in GDT, but absolutely shows up in mental health and distrust. So why does all this matter? We are seeing again how interconnected everything is in this world. A choke point crisis in one region can alter prices and availability of goods half a world away. The longer disruptions continue, the more they will push companies to redesign supply chains around resilience, not just the lowest cost. This could be good for stability, but it may keep some prices higher for longer. For everyday people, the impact can feel like random delays or shortages. Connecting those to geopolitical decisions helps us see who is responsible and what alternatives exists. The way governments handle stranded travelers and crews with clear support or with silence, this is a test of whether they see these people as citizens and partners or as acceptable collateral. And if this crisis is resolved by negotiation rather than escalation, it strengthens the argument for practical diplomacy over performative toughness in future standoffs. This would save lives and money, even if it doesn't generate the loudest headlines. Hormuz first, nuclear later. That's the shape of an Iranian deal. Alongside the pause, the shape of a possible Iran deal is coming into view. Several reports say the U.S. is increasingly open to a sequenced approach. Settle the Hormuz and shipping issues first, and leave nuclear limits and sanction questions for later phases. Mediators like Pakistan are helping both sides test this narrow focus aimed at calming the most urgent risks to trade and regional stability. At the same time, Trump continues to talk tough, saying the bombing starts if Iran doesn't make a deal, and keeping pressure and uncertainty high. Here's what we do know. Hormuz security and shipping are front and center in current contacts. U.S. officials are openly testing a pause to see if talks produce results. Markets are reacting to signals of progress. And what is not confirmed, though, we don't know whether Iran has agreed to concrete steps like demining traffic lanes or weapons limits near the strait. We don't know when nuclear sanction issues would return to the table, or if it does in some serious way. We don't know if Congress and regional allies will respond to a phased approach. And with all this, we have to deal with gaps in the coverage. Based on which outlet you select, information about an upcoming quote-unquote deal can miss the following. They may not clearly explain what issues what issues are in this phase and what are not. Some of the right-leaning coverage treats any sequencing as either a brilliant tactic or a total surrender, rather than as a testable strategy with specific goals. Some of the left-leaning coverage focuses on Trump's tone, while giving less attention to the regional diplomacy and local interests involved. And all of this has a local impact. The human impact is that concerns that people living under the shadow of both war and sanctions are being asked to accept a kind of partial peace, safer shipping now, but uncertain nuclear and economic futures later, while the elites are arguing about sequencing. For Iranian civilians, a calmer Hormuz without meaningful economic relief may feel like safety without dignity. For others, any reduction in risk is a welcome first step. For people in neighboring states, a focus on de-escalation at sea can reduce the chance of missile strikes and port attacks landing in their communities. And for global citizens, a narrow deal that actually works is better than a grand bargain that never arrives. But we rarely hear that trade-off discussed honestly. So why does all this matter now? If a modest but real Hormuz arrangement takes hold, it can save lives and money quickly, even if it leaves harder questions for later. If sequencing becomes the norm, we may see more partial deals in world politics, which can be a feature, not a bug, as long as they're transparent about their limits and actively are built on. For citizens, the key question here is, are leaders explaining what they're trading in concrete steps and not just slogans? The way the media frames this as an appeasement or pragmatism can either encourage more realistic problem solving or push leaders back towards an all or nothing demands that rarely work. For you, understanding how these deals are structured matters because it shapes how long your world is driven by crisis headlines versus more boring, stable routines. Jobs and inflation. There's a lot brighter data and reality, but the reality is that things are still tight. Let's take this home down to the local economy. Recent numbers show one of the best combined jobs and inflation pictures in several years. A recent report a recent report shows about 130,000 new jobs were added and unemployment around 4.3%, suggesting a still resilient labor market. Inflation readings are about 2.4% for headline and 2.5% for core, the latest core readings since early 2021. Analysts say recent wage gains are now outpacing inflation for many workers, which means some households are finally seeing real improvement. Now, here's what we can confirm. We know that job growth and low employment point to a solid labor market. Headline and core inflation are near central bank targets. Wages are, on average, growing faster than prices. But what is not confirmed is how long this will hold if shocks from war, policy, or market shifts intensifies. How evenly wage gains are distributed across industries and regions. And sometimes these numbers are adjusted down the road. When it comes to the news outlets, who is covering what? Here are some of the gaps. Some outlets talk as if inflation is fixed, without addressing the cumulative price jump since 2020. Others focus on persistent hardship, missing the real progress that could be built on. Few explain how a couple of years of wage beating inflation could slowly change what life feels like for families who've been stuck. So what's the human impact? The concern here is that the averages can tell a story of victory, while many families still feel one emergency away from trouble because the floor they're standing on is higher than it used to be. For some workers, a modest raise finally beats inflation, but only enough to pay down old debt or to catch up on deferred repairs, not to build real savings. People whose industries haven't shared in the growth, or whose health, caregiving, or location limit their options, may hear talk of a strong economy as a kind of denial of their reality. And when coverage over celebrates macro wins without acknowledging who is still stuck, it certainly deepens cynicism about both media and policymakers. So why does all of this matter? If wages keep beating inflation, even slowly, households that have been treading water may finally start rebuilding a margin of safety. If later leaders take the data as a reason to ignore affordability, this window of relative strength will be wasted instead of used to tackle housing, childcare, and healthcare costs. For you, the right question isn't, is the economy good or bad? But compared to what and for whom? Your sector, your region, your family? The way the media handles this will affect whether we use this moment to build resilience or just declare victory and move on. And it's exactly in relatively good times that it's easiest and most ethical to address deeper inequities, because the system has more room to adjust. Housing affordability in 2026, the policy, choices, and pressure. Let's take a look at housing. Experts expect inflation to hover around 2.4% this year, but price levels have remained elevated, and housing affordability is still a top concern. Some economists say homes could be modestly more affordable in deportations and labor shortages in construction, and large budget deficits that keep borrowing costs higher for government, builders, and buyers. Here's what is confirmed. We know that inflation is expected to stay near 2.4% this year. Housing could become slightly more affordable if rates and incomes follow current forecasts. Tariffs, immigration crackdowns, and deficit-driven rates are adding to construction and financing costs. What is not confirmed yet is whether these tariffs and immigration policies will stay in place or shift. How quickly local zoning and permitting reforms will move in different cities. We also don't know whether future budget fights will push interest rates higher again. Many outlets are treating housing affordability as a natural market outcome rather than the product of specific choices about tariffs, budgets, and immigration. Some of the outlets coverage often centers around investors and national averages, while tenant and worker voices get reduced to anecdotes. Very few pieces connect war spending and higher risk premiums to higher borrowing costs across the economy. So here's the human impact. The concern here is that while forecasts talk about modest improvement, many people are up against structural barriers that no single good year can fix. Families who delayed buying during the rate spikes now face the question, is this our only window or another trap? Workers pushed out of the construction industry by deportations or precarious statuses are missing from public debates about housing, even though their absence is one reason building costs more. And when longtime residents are slowly priced out, communities lose relationships, culture, and support networks that no spreadsheet can really capture the human toll. Why does this matter? We are seeing affordability as a policy outcome, not just a personal failing or an act of God. This gives citizens leverage to demand change. As inflation moderates and the economy stabilizes, governments have more options. They can invest in housing supply and protections, or they can maintain the status quo. For you, it helps to separate what you can control: timing, budget, local knowledge, especially from what you can't, things like national rates, tariffs, and big policy swings. That can reduce self-blame and really sharpen your advocacy. Media that consistently connects the dots from budgets and immigration to construction costs and rents help people see housing as a system that we can redesign, not just a moral test of individuals. And if we don't address these structural drivers now, the next shock, whether from war, climate, or policy, will again hit the same vulnerable groups the hardest. Well, that does it for today's Spectrum. Our goal here is simple: share what has happened and separate what's confirmed from what's still unclear. And we do all this to make the human impact and future stakes visible, without partisan jerseys, without outrage performance. As you see another coverage, as you experience other coverage in other outlets today, notice who explains the consequences for your life and who mostly keeps score for one side or the other. The more that we demand clarity, honesty, and basic respect from our information, the harder it becomes to sell us spin. I'm Jared Uraine with the 5 Diamond Group at Vice Realty, and this is The Spectrum. Be kind to each other, ask for evidence, and I'll see you next time.